This is Business Therapy, healing businesses from the inside out through communication and emotional intelligence. I'm your host, management consultant Diane Hansen, and with me as always is Christine Salvo, therapist, certified mediator, and certified hypnotist.
Good morning. Hello, everybody.
Good morning, everybody. And today we are just in a bright baby new day, and we have Roy Cohen with us. And Roy Cohen is a career counselor and executive coach and a leading expert in Wall Street job search and career management. He's the author of the Wall Street Professional Survival Guide, the best-selling and only career resource for people who work on Wall Street and for those who want to. He is frequently engaged by the press, and he has appeared numerous times on TV and radio, providing feedback on all matters involving finance, careers, and employment, from job search to life at work. He's invited often as a guest speaker, most recently as the keynote for CFA New York's annual career event. He was selected in 2013 as the official career coach for the movie Lee Daniels' The Butler, and he serves on the advisory board for Men's Fitness magazine. Additionally, he serves as an expert witness on legal matters involving Wall Street career management, job search, and professional options. Roy is proud to announce he was also selected as a winner in December 2019 in the first annual Rancho La Puerta Writing Contest. He has an MBA from Columbia and an undergraduate degree from Cornell. Welcome, Roy.
Hi there.
So
nice to meet you both.
Have you. Yeah.
Thank you.
It is so amazing to have you, and it's so amazing to have you, being that you are one of those who has been and is recovering from coronavirus.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel very fortunate that that we've recuperated successfully, quickly. The symptoms were relatively mild, and it's just a matter of getting energy back now. I've been inspired, quite frankly, by Chris Cuomo's frequent broadcasts on CNN, and he really captures what it's like to have the virus. It's tough.
Yeah. And I actually love the alignment of what we're talking about today, and that's removing the element of fear. And originally we were talking about late career decision making, which I still want to talk about, but I imagine you may have faced, and your partner as well contracted the virus, some fear around that once you were diagnosed. What was that like?
It's interesting. I never felt the fear that something bad would happen. In fact, it may sound somewhat odd, but I was expecting that at some point I would get it. So when you live with the belief that you could potentially get something, it frees you up from feeling fear. And now I actually feel somewhat emboldened because I will have immunity, or relative immunity, and it will allow me to go out into the world without having to worry as much as most folks have to nowadays, because, to be quite frank with you, the virus is all around us, and I presume, quite frankly, in being out there, that everyone has it. And that is the assumption that I make about people, because so many of the folks who have the virus are asymptomatic, and you don't know who has it or how you can get it. So my thinking is I'm freed up now, and it's a liberating experience.
So, Roy, I have to say, after hearing your bio, which was extremely impressive, right? And then hearing how you've handled, I've had coronavirus and I'm liberated. It doesn't surprise me one bit that you're the voice for all of these different platforms, and that you've had such a successful career, because I can already tell that your mindset is so impeccable that it doesn't actually matter what comes your way. You're going to find the sunshine. You're going to make the lemonade. You're going to do the thing and turn this into a positive experience.
I think that we all have to stay hopeful, and we have to look for opportunities. We have to figure out what we can do to make things better. We look for solutions, and this is going to sound very, very funny, but I'm not a TV watcher, so the opportunity for me actually just to be a sloth for the last couple of weeks allowed me to catch up on a whole bunch of Netflix and Amazon Prime and shows that I would have never watched. And now I feel like I'm at least culturally connected. And it's not something I ever allowed myself to do if I we're not stuck in bed.
I
I
love it.
totally agree. I totally agree. I've been one of the most culturally disconnected people, and now that I've had the opportunity to slow down, I can participate in conversations about Tiger King.
I couldn't, I tried, but it didn't work for me that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I have to tell you, Unorthodox is amazing. So
Nice.
I urge you all to watch that. It's actually quite beautiful. It's illuminating.
How is it
And
illuminating?
It offers some insight into a world that's unfamiliar to me, that's foreign, and it's about courage.
Ooh. And you specialize in courage, in deconstructing the fear, emboldening your clients to present their best selves. And one of the places that, maybe may not bring out the best self all the time, and that's Wall Street. And you've been there a while. In fact, I know when we had our discussion, you mentioned that you had an office at the World Trade Center that you lost on 9/11.
I did, yeah. I had the good fortune for many, many years to serve as Goldman Sachs career counselor. And Goldman Sachs is one of the world's most preeminent investment banks. And I was the person at the firm who worked with individuals on a range of career matters, whether it involved moving within the organization or exiting the organization. And I had a number of offices at the firm, and one of those offices was at the World Trade Center. And when I lost my office on 9/11, I'd been with Goldman Sachs for over 14 years, and
wow.
I just felt like I had a need to shake it up a little bit. I was playing in sort of the safe zone. And it's very easy to be a career counselor for individuals at a firm like Goldman Sachs because they have many options that are available to them. And what I realized was that I needed to test myself out in the larger world.
Mm.
So decided to exit the firm. It took about 2.5 years to do that, and ultimately hung a shingle out.
Yeah.
I had a need to really kind of test whether or not I was as good as I thought I was.
Was there any kind of, we call it mortality motivation. So of course, 9/11 was this great tragedy. And I'm sure there was some idea on some level I could have been there. Like I had an office there. Who's to say I wasn't going to be there that day or a different day or whatever? And sometimes when you said I felt like I needed to shake it up, I needed to test myself, I needed to kind of like see what I was made of. I'm curious if there was any kind of reality testing that happened there of this happened, life can be short, you never know the next tragedy. If I don't get out there and try this, I may never know what I'm really made of.
Well, I actually was there that morning. I also served as a volunteer fire warden for my floor. So
Wow.
having experienced that, and to be quite frank with you, in the blink of an eye, to see people perish, and also to see, as we were exiting, firemen who were literally ascending to their deaths, leaves you questioning whether or not you've done everything to fulfill your potential. And that was my turning point. It was a light switch that was flipped. And what I realized was that I had no one to blame but myself if I felt like I wasn't doing as much as possible to fulfill my own potential. And I didn't want that to ever feel like a regret for me. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to shake things up a little bit.
Wow.
Yeah, and we were talking about fear and how fear can be real fear or it can be imagined fear. So, how do you delineate between a real fear or an imagined fear?
Um, it's kind of interesting. I'm not sure that there's much of a difference because if you have fear, it's real to you. And the challenge is to deconstruct that fear and to make sure that if you do address it, that you have a safe landing. So when I was making the decision to make a change, and I'd made a career change 14 years prior, I had actually been a banker and made the decision to return to my original training, which was as a psychologist. So when we ensure that we have provided ourselves with a soft cushion, it's a lot easier to jump.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's an important step to take. I think that often fears are irrational when we act on impulse, but we don't necessarily consider the consequence.
Sure.
Mm, yeah, yeah, exactly. When you jump, but you don't know if there's a mattress underneath you or if there's spikes.
Yeah,
Right. So that
absolutely.
that slow transition, you said you made the decision and then it took you 2.5 years. And that to me is what you're talking about, that pillow, where it wasn't the next day you said, you know what, I quit, I'm going to wing it, I'm going to figure this out. Some people do that, right? But that impulsivity, I think, definitely heightens that fear, right? And it's real fear, it's rational fear, because it's like, where is my next check coming? And if I don't hustle, I don't make money. And so it sounds to me like you were very strategic, that you planned this out, that you had an idea, and that you kind of built in a buffer just in case it didn't go as quick or was as successful as maybe you had hoped or something like that.
Well, that was my intention. Well, first and foremost, I actually advised Goldman immediately, but I also was very clear that I wasn't looking to exit immediately, that I wanted
Okay.
to have a thoughtful transition. And I recognized that my relationship with the firm was sacred.
Hmm.
And I didn't want to in any way jeopardize that relationship. And it was one of longstanding and an important one to me.
Right.
So the process for me was the decision was made immediately, but the execution happened over time. And what I had to do is exercise patience. And while
Mm.
I had that time, I was able to begin to develop a game plan and a strategy for myself. So it wasn't as if I was just acting impulsively and then jumping into the deep end of the pool.
Right.
I learned how to swim, and so I was very lucky. And I also had the support of the firm. They were really terrific in easing that transition and ensuring that it was a seamless one for me.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lovely story. That's kind of I don't want to say rare, but you don't always hear that.
Well,
Well, I,
communication is so important. And I think that's the core of what you're talking about too, is that it wasn't like you hatched your plans in private and went behind closed doors and waited till everything was done and everything was perfect and everything was complete before you communicated. You let Goldman Sachs know this was going to happen. However, it was not going to happen immediately. And you kept that communicative thread attached so that it wasn't this big surprise aha, and it bought you time to develop mindfully.
well, I think it's important to manage the narrative for all of us, and I encourage my clients to do that. When we act impulsively, we get sloppy,
Yeah.
and I believe that no one ever wants to be surprised or presented with the unexpected.
Hmm.
We need to know who our stakeholders are and make sure that we're communicating appropriately with those stakeholders. Sometimes they're not equipped to handle the truth or all of the truth, and we have to make sure that we're feeding it to them in a way that allows them to be comfortable. And other times it might be just ripping off the band-aid. There are a whole range of approaches that one needs to take and to consider. That's why it can't be done. I mean, sometimes impulse has to drive a process or it won't allow us to exit. But in large part, I think that there needs to be some careful consideration and then a strategy around it.
So when you say stakeholders, so I'm a family therapist, so I'm always bringing it back to the humans, right? Our families, the people that care about us. And I'm thinking, stakeholders aren't just your employers. Sometimes it's your partners and your children, and because you may need to spoon feed this idea that you're going to make this drastic change or this bold change that not only affects you but affects others.
Sure.
And kind of taking that slow, kind of like sweet way, right? The slow, sweet way of change is coming and it's going to be great. And these are all the reasons you don't need to worry. And this is my plan. And really trying to kind of finesse that. So I wanted to hear your experience, since this is what you do and you're on your
Well,
own, it sounds like, for many years now. And so how do you handle that, the family piece versus the business piece? Because it kind of makes you wear two different hats.
I think it's important to remember that whenever we make a decision, whether it's about buying a new set of pots and pans or a career decision, others are involved, and we need to
Yeah.
make sure that we allow them to participate. To make a decision independently is unfair to those other members of our families. And it's selfish. When folks get fired, spouses get fired too. They're
Right.
a part of that process. When people contemplate a change of employment, your spouse and your children may potentially be impacted. If you decide to go back to school, any decision we make has some sort of potential for fallout. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. We just need to
No.
make sure that we have permission and that we have a solution in place, and that we're prepared for pushback. Because if we're
Yeah.
Absolutely.
not, we don't want folks to feel like they've been blindsided or that they've been backed into a corner.
Right.
Yeah. So kind of elaborating on that a little bit. So sometimes you're the one, like this happened at 9/11 and you knew I have to make a change. So you had already gotten past the fear. You already were in the planning stage, but sometimes our families, right, and the people that rely on us are held a little bit more hostage. Like,
Yeah.
I hope you know what you're doing, right? And since our topic is kind of getting past the fear, there's an internal process, but there's also that external process you were kind of mentioning. And I was just a little curious in your coaching career how you've kind of talked to people about that. Like, how
Well,
do you get the family past fear after
it's
you've gotten
interesting.
yourself past it?
So I'll actually talk about clients of mine who lose jobs.
Okay.
So when folks who are often in senior positions are separated involuntarily, meaning that they get fired, there's often a feeling of shame that happens, and they're sometimes unwilling to share that experience with their significant others. They may even not tell them,
Right.
and it's unfair to everyone not to be able to share that information because you're robbing them of their potential to provide support. Now, they may have fear as well, but they need to be partners with you as you navigate this process. So I encourage my clients always to exercise with transparent communication, that they need to be honest and open and to ask questions and to provide answers, and not to sugarcoat everything with some sort of saccharine explanation, because it's simply not fair. And it could also, to be quite frank with you, it could also be a learning experience if children are old enough. So I tell my clients who have kids who are teenagers that the loss of employment or the desire to even make a change is not something to be fearful of. In fact, their
Mhm.
kids are entering a world where they're going to be faced with far more change than they could ever have imagined for themselves. How they model for them their ability to navigate change has the power to make their children less fearful going out
Right.
into the world. So if you can show them that you're strong and creative and insightful and that you have a strategy, it
Yeah.
will allow your significant others to believe that they can do the very same thing.
I could not agree with you more.
Mm.
I was just having a conversation yesterday and someone was like, my life is falling apart and my kids are witnessing this. And I said, good, because their life is going to fall apart too. And they're going to think something's wrong with them and they're going to think it's happening just to them and they're going to take it personal. Of course, the conversation is over text and she says, why is this always happening to me? And I said, you're asking the wrong person. I said, I've worked with at least 1,000 people over the last 10 years and everyone thinks they're the only person, but the reality is life bites us all. We
Yeah.
all have experiences and it really is about that resiliency. It's about that bounce. But I totally agree with this idea of we have to let our kids see it because otherwise they have these expectations and we know that this can tie directly into suicide. I'm ashamed, I'm afraid, I feel bad, I'm embarrassed. I'm not going to live. I can't live through this. And it's like, no, no,
Or
no, wait, you can. You could totally live through this
and your kids may feel like they're a burden, and that's why you need to make sure that you're relabeling this for them not as a problem, but quite frankly as an opportunity to learn about oneself, to identify solutions, to be creative, and to maybe graduate to a new and better place.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think whether it's your family or whether it's someone you work with or work for, everyone also has different levels of need in this communication. So you have the people who need to be involved in the decision because the decision is going to impact them. Then you have the people who are kind of on the hook for your decision. It's not going to
Yeah.
impact them, but they need to be informed. They need to know what's going on. And you have your antis and you have your allies. You have the people who are going to be aligned with you, and you're going to have the people who are, going to be. John Cotter has a fantastic book called Our Iceberg is Melting, and it talks about the no-no penguin. And the no-no penguin naysays absolutely everything. And you're going to have those people. So understanding, and you might have these dynamics within your own family as well. But really, when we're talking about work environments, we're kind of just all thrust into unintentional and sometimes dysfunctional families.
Yeah.
And to understand who needs to be informed, who needs to be involved, who needs to be a decision maker versus who just shouldn't be in the process at all because they just want to rip it apart because that's just their role. And those people in companies, they have their role as well. Is they know they're the deconstructors. They're the ones who challenge you. They're the ones who tear it up so it can be made better. But who you involve in that decision is so important and has a lot to do with fear, because once you do open that thread of communication, you open yourself up to the installation of others' thoughts, others' fears, others' feelings about what you're doing.
And
So
we have to be very
yeah.
careful that we don't mislabel or presume that other people are always going to react in a typical sort of way. We
Right.
have to be prepared for them to surprise us,
Exactly.
to rise to the occasion.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily that people always act the way we expect them to.
Absolutely.
So the
Right.
way we involve them needs to be somewhat flexible and responsive to what they might be expressing. So it forces us to pay attention and to listen very closely to what they're saying, how they're saying it, and not to make an assumption that they're going to either fall apart or not handle it with strength.
Right. And it's about remaining open to that outcome and letting people, like you said, surprise you, and not also trying to install your own outcome onto things, walking on eggshells, so to speak. Just, get clear, get factual, and involve people and what you have to say. And I think where this really impacts people is later on in their careers. Later on in their careers, the shift is so much more of either thrust upon them as a layoff, or it's a risk because now they have no passion about what they're currently doing, and they want to pivot, they want to shift, and there's internal fear that comes with that process. But there's also, what they get around them as
Hmm.
they're making this choice. And I think what was really just intriguing as we were talking and before we came on the show is we were talking about just kind of the stages of that you go through as a late career professional, not only working through fear and that sense of urgency, but you know how did you get here? Are you evolving? Is it a skill gap? Are you stuck in a rut? Is your skill set obsolete? And then how do you change and transform some of those things into your next opportunity? So when you have a client who's in that position, when they're looking to transform, what process do you walk them through to help them discover what motivates them, what their passions are, tapping into their support systems?
So before a plan is ever developed, the first step is really to figure out how they feel and what may be some of their barriers and challenges. And I often find that when people, especially if they're fired involuntarily, there's a sense of shame, and that needs to be addressed first and foremost. Because when people don't feel good about themselves, they or they feel something that needs to be hidden, they're not open to conducting an honest evaluation. So the first step is really to restore one's confidence and to have a realistic view of what the market looks like. The next step is to decide what they want to be, and whether or not that's realistic. Often folks who are very senior in either the organizations in which they work, their level of compensation, the role that they play, they have an enormous amount of self-worth that's invested in that role. And so we need to figure out how attached they are to that.
Yeah.
So before we figure out, well, what are the options, we need to figure out whether or not the investment in that option is so important to them that it outweighs whatever rational feelings might exist about the marketplace. I had a client this morning I was talking to who told me that she could never again ever work in her industry, and she's considered to be one of the foremost individuals and experts in this field. Well, when we actually started to talk, it turned out that that wasn't necessarily the case. There are adjacent industries and roles that would make great sense for her, but she was presenting it to me as an absolute and as a very dramatic decision, when in fact the potential options for her were wider than I was led to believe initially.
Right.
So it really takes a lot of discussion and conversation, and some patience early on.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah,
think
and
those were
finding
some
out
excellent points.
the real data that you're dealing with. So when you really drill down to, what's the actual situation, you're looking at the objective versus the subjective. You're trying to remove those, like you said, emotionally charged absolutes. I always, I never, and removing that and just stripping it down to, okay, well, what is right now? So we can
Well, I always, I never, and I won't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the biggest challenge that some people have. I won't. When in fact, it could free them up to be presented with infinite possibilities. It doesn't mean they have to pursue them, but at least it frees them up to be thinking creatively.
Exactly. There's this one quote by Herbert Spencer, which I love, and it's something I'm paraphrasing, but there's one thing that's sure to keep a man in everlasting ignorance, and that is contempt prior to investigation.
I love it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Roy, for being on Business Therapy. It's been an absolute delight. And
Welcome.
How can our listeners find you if they're more curious about what you do and who you are and what you have to offer?
Well, I'm all over the internet. I used to be on TV quite a bit, and all they need to do is Google Wall Street Career Coach or Roy Cohen Career Coach. My website is careercoachny.com. But typically, if folks are looking for somebody like myself, it's easy enough to track me down. Wall Street Career Coach.
well, we
Google
are.
that, and I probably would come up ad nauseum in terms of references, and
Excellent.
I'm quoted often, so it's easy enough to track me down.
I love
Yeah.
it. Well, I am so glad that we were able to track you down. Thank you, Roy, for being on
You're
Business
welcome.
Therapy.
Yeah, it was a great pleasure. Great pleasure.
My pleasure as well.
And
Nice to meet
happy
you both.
healing. I'm so happy that you're getting better and that you're one of the success stories.
Well, thank you. Yes.
What an inspiration.
I appreciate that. Nice to meet you both.
This has been Business Therapy, healing businesses from the inside out through communication and emotional intelligence. I'm Diane Hansen, management consultant.
Christine Salvo, marriage and family therapist, hypnotherapist, and mediator.
Have a great morning.
Wonderful day today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.